inviting me and for having me here. It's such a pleasure to meet people interested in aging in China. I am in Australia, very far away, but I share your interest in China because demography is destiny, is an old saying, and I think you know that demographic change and the age structure of the population drives a lot of decisions and individual decisions and economic outcomes and policy changes. So it's really the underlying thing that we should all be studying, I think. So I want to talk a bit about where I am based. So and I should have probably a slide, but instead I will just share my screen and show you. So I am based in Australia, and we have a large research center which has funding from the government, and it's been running since 2011, and it's called CPA, and it's a large group based in different universities, and we have professors and postdocs, and everybody in this center is looking at population aging in the sense that we're not looking at individual aging. So we're not doing research on the medical side of aging, but we're looking at the implications of how, when a population ages, how it impacts consumer decisions, family decisions, labor force, government politics, policies, pension systems, and so on. And so, so it's very interdisciplinary, and we look also at the impact on organizations and how they can offer flexible work arrangements as people age, and so on, and decision making by individuals. But in this large center, we have a group of people that is interested in aging in Asia, and we had a group first that looked just at aging in China for 4 years from 2015, and I was a senior researcher in that group, and now we've extended it a bit to more the Asia region. But so in this group you will see we have collaborations with many very high quality universities in China and internationally. I work with people in Renmin University and Peking University, and we publish together, and students come and visit, and we're very open to making new connections. So I usually have 1 or 2 visiting PhD students from China or from other countries, and they come and study with me for 3 months, for 1 year, and they come and join the University of New South Wales. We have excellent courses in anything from economics to actuarial studies to social policy research to health sciences. And importantly, they join our research center, and they participate in seminars and trainings. And so if you are interested in coming to work with us and joining us and visiting us, please do reach out. So I'm very, very eager to make new connections. I'm the director of research of this team, and my role is to find new research collaborations and new partners, so to say. So this was the background. So now I'm going to share my presentation. Do you now see my slides, or do you still see the website that I shared earlier?
It's still the website.
Okay, let me change that. So I will switch it over to my slides. So, all right. So, all right. So my talk today is about healthy aging. It's one part of the research that I do. So in my role as the director of research, I supervise PhD students. I have 6 PhD students, and I work with different postdocs, and I work with whatever topic they come to me. And I was very lucky for this research that I got to work with a professor, John Beard, who was the director of a department at the World Health Organization on aging. So he was for 12 years the director of the Department of Aging and Life Course at the World Health Organization, and he has retired from the World Health Organization, is now a professor with our research center. And I also have a very, very outstanding PhD student, Yafei Si, who has a background in public health, and he joined me on this project, and together with a lot of other people, including a colleague from the World Health Organization, this is our team, and the topic is intrinsic capacity. So what's this? Let me give you some background. So in 2015, the World Health Organization published a new report on aging and health. And what the aim of this report was, first of all, to propose a new way of how we should think about aging. So they wanted to propose a new concept of how we should think about aging in a positive way, that it is something that is an achievement of society, that it is something that enables people to live longer lives, and that we should perceive it as a positive thing, and which I find very refreshing, because my background is in insurance, and a lot of my research is around pensions and health insurance for people as they age. And insurers usually, they see, oh God, people are aging and there will be so much more insurance claims and people will draw their pensions longer, and they often frame it as a kind of financial burden. And I am very skeptical of that, because to the individuals, it's something wonderful to live longer. And so the World Health Organization has proposed this, that we should think of aging in a very positive way, and that we should think about how we can make it happen so that people age healthily and can still do all those things they have value to do. So encourage them and allow them and help them to have successful healthy aging. And so in this concept, when they said, okay, we want to basically propose a framework, a public policy framework for healthy aging, they also suggest how we should think about healthy aging. And they say it's basically the healthy aging is the outcome of the individual's attributes, or the individual's intrinsic capacity and their environment that they live in. So intrinsic capacity is something that we will focus on in today's talk. It's all the individual level attributes that might contribute to healthy aging. So it's basically some different measures of capacity. How well your cognition works, your senses, your locomotor, and so on. So it's the individual's ability to do things. But of course, to achieve successful healthy aging, there also needs to be a supportive environment. So there's no point if the individual is still very, very able, but there, for example, is no public transport or no public infrastructure, then they can't get anywhere and do the things they want to do, even if they could. And so, but in this talk, we will focus on the individual's capacities, on the intrinsic capacity, and we want to dig a bit more and understand what it actually is and how it can be measured and conceptualized. And so before our paper, there were a few studies that picked on this World Health Organization report, and they said, okay, what could that be, intrinsic capacity? And they suggested a concept, and then be it they used ELSA data from the UK, which you're probably all very familiar with, and they tried to estimate using basically factor analysis from ELSA data what this intrinsic capacity factor could be. And I looked at it and I thought, this is so interesting. Let's do this for China, and let's see if it holds and if it's similar. Because of course the Chinese population has a very different has had a very different experience, different economic development, different health system development, and very interesting rapid demographic change. So the aim of our study was to basically see if that concept of intrinsic capacity that was established in some few previous studies is stable and is similar in the Chinese population. So we have several ongoing projects in this field, but the first one we're very happy was published in August in a very nice gerontological journal, the Journal of Gerontology, Series A. It's a US journal, and it has a good impact factor, and we were quite happy with it. So what did we do in this study? We took child's data. You know all what child is, so I won't have to go into detail, but we used the national baseline and as the main data set, and we used the 2013 wave to see if intrinsic capacity predicts some other outcomes in the next wave. Okay, and so we took everybody in charge who was over 60, who had agreed to give some blood, some non-blood biomarkers, but also to give a blood sample, and for whom we had follow-up data. And so and we had some outliers, and we dealt with it, and I will talk to you about it later, but basically this were the main criteria, and with some modeling to replace outliers, this total study sample was then about 7,600 participants. So now, what's intrinsic capacity? So I mentioned just before, it's basically a composite measure of your health as you are older. So think of intrinsic capacity as one number that summarizes how able and healthy and fit and capable you still are at older ages. And so I find it really fascinating, because I did a lot of research on, say, economic policy, or some, say, policy interventions, and on individuals as they get older, and I never know which health indicator to include, because health is so multidimensional and you can include so many different measures. So in one project of mine, where we look at the impact of migration of children out of the village on their parents' health, I think we used 12 health indicators. And so whoever worked in this area before, I'm sure you share my view that there's so many different possible health variables you can look at. And so I found it very attractive that this measure is trying to combine them into one number. I mean, we're humans, we like simple things. And so I found it attractive. And so what it does is basically, these authors, they say, let's look at what's in existing surveys, what kind of health variables do we have, and look at those where we know that there is some link from literature that these variables are somehow relevant to capacity as we get older. And let's pick up those that can distinguish between high and low capacity at older ages, and that also have certain sensitivity to detect change over time. So it's no good if you include gender, because gender usually doesn't change, right? And so it should be some variables that change a little. But basically, I would say what the authors before us did was look through surveys like ELSA or CHARTS, and just basically include anything that looks like a health measure at older ages, and just throw it all in. And so the factors are listed here, and we have detailed them in our paper. So there has something about how good a person is at moving around and standing, a balance, grip strength, hearing, vision, cognition, affect, some blood measures, and sleep quality and quantity. So we do not include ADL ability. We think of it as an outcome. So we will see if our intrinsic capacity measure predicts activity of daily living limitations. So I know that ADLs, I often use ADLs in my other research as an outcome variable, and that's what we will do here. But what is problematic with ADL, it's so lumpy. Like usually people have like no ADLs, and then they start to have them. And so it's not a very sensitive measure of aging. It's something that is 0, and then poof, you have it, and then it just gets worse. And so it's what's attractive about this intrinsic capacity measure is that it goes up like slowly and you can detect small changes in capacity. So so the outcome measure is ADLs and IADLs. And so we basically looked at whether they were, we looked at those people who had 0 limitations. They were fully independent in CHILDS 2011, and then we saw if at 2 years later they had some limitations in any of these ADLs. So they had, at the moment they said, yes, I have some difficulties, then we classify them as having an ADL limitation. So the statistical modeling is basically structural equation modeling. The first one is we started with some factor analysis. First was just basic factor analysis, and then B factor. So looking at 5 domains and then 1 main factor. And we did confirmatory factor analysis, and it is called structural equation modeling because we can include covariates in the modeling. And we, for those people who had missing variables in the main exposure indicators, so in the main variables that go into the, like these ones, where if we would have, so in the first version we sent to the journal, we had excluded everybody who had missing values and reduced the sample size quite a bit. And so they said, can you do it again? And so we used maximum likelihood estimation to replace these missing values using a missing at random assumption, and the results were quite similar. And so the referee said, why don't you go with that bigger sample, and then you can say it's more representative of the Chinese population. That's what we did. And so we did some linear regression models, and we did mediation analysis. So we did some statistical modeling, and this is basically what it looks like. So when we did the initial factor analysis, we found 5 factors. So interestingly, the variables that we throw in, so basically we looked through the charts, so we put in all these variables, recall, so cognitive variables and vision and so on, and we threw them in, and then they clustered into these 5 domains. And they also linked to a general factor, which we can label as intrinsic capacity. So what's nice is basically you put these variables in, and it comes a structure out of them where these factor loadings give you some 5 domains that actually make sense. So it's nice to see that basically, for example, the first one, recall, mass, and draw, they have the highest factor loadings on the cognitive factor, and they are cognitive variables. So now, the director of our research center, John Piggott, he says, well, the surveys, they were designed based on literature, right? Charles and Elsa, they are informed by years of research onto which variables you should collect. So, and they probably thought the same. They thought like, okay, we should have some variables from each of these domains. So they included these questions in the survey, and now you just take it and put it in. And basically you get out the domains they had in mind when they designed Charles. So he's a bit like, don't be too surprised to get these, but still it's nice to, I mean, we didn't say these are the 5 domains, they came out of the factor analysis, and very nicely they interpret, they have a meaning. And so, we find the concept seems to work because it makes kind of sense when you look at what it gives you. We also tried it for younger ages, 45 to 60, and it was quite similar. And we think that it's promising for our research because aging, like, you know, this group knows that aging is so diverse. So health outcomes at higher ages are so different by individual. So that's probably, the more you study aging, the more you see there isn't one retiree or there isn't one older person. Everyone is different. Inequalities. I published a paper in the China Economic Review showing how inequalities in income accumulate over life, and the pension system is the final step of how it is unequal. And so with knowing that inequality, and those of you who do life course analysis, of course, you know these things build up over the life. So it's no surprise that there's so many different outcomes. And so it's interesting to have a measure of health that varies, and also to be able to do it maybe from younger ages, from 45 to 60, not just from 60. So we think in future research that this intrinsic capacity can also be assessed at younger ages, where already people start to lose some of these capacities, partly because of our lifestyles, where we don't move enough and we don't exercise enough and so on. So then we looked at the correlation or the link with sorry, not correlation, from the regression and from the models, from the structural equation models, we looked at the link of intrinsic capacity with the covariates, and we find that it is lower intrinsic capacity scores are significantly associated with higher age, being female, having lower levels of education, having lower wealth, and having a higher number of chronic diseases, which are all consistent with previous research, which has shown that these characteristics should be or are associated with poorer health in older ages, which supports the construct validity of this general factor intrinsicity. And then we looked at whether these covariates, multimorbidity, and intrinsic capacity, how they all work together to predict ADL and IADLs. And interestingly, we find that all of these variables predict the onset of functional limitations, ADL limitations, but intrinsic capacity in itself has an additional effect. So there's a direct effect of this measure in intrinsic capacity on ADL onset. And so it's so this measure and the effect was much larger than the indirect effect, for example, of intrinsic capacity through multimorbidity. So if you had a choice to look at what predicts IADL or ADL limitations, you could just calculate an intrinsic capacity score, and that could be a good predictor of ADL limitations. And that's very interesting for people like me who do research on insurance, because a lot of insurance products, long-term care, even some of the long-term care insurance pilot programs in China use ADL limitations as the trigger for when the person receives some insurance payments. So insurance companies, on insurance programs, they want to model the risk of an individual to become disabled and receiving long-term care insurance payments, and that you can basically use intrinsic capacity as a good predictor, among other things. So I'm coming to the end of my presentation and to leave some time for questions. Basically what we did is we did we said longitudinal analysis, but in reality, we calculated intrinsic capacity scores based on the child's baseline. We found a 5-factor structure of intrinsic capacity, and we found that this factor, the general factor intrinsic capacity, predicts outcomes in IADLs and ADLs, as I just said. We found that the structure has a good construct validity. Interestingly, we found that the structure is very similar to what previous research showed for ELSA data for the English population, which was a huge surprise because we expected that the structure would have perhaps been different. And it's also consistent with previous research in gerontology. We find it's so what we conclude from it, it seems to be a good concept, quite robust, applicable across populations, not just in developing countries like China, also in developed countries like the UK. It seems to be holding for younger ages. And we had a lot of when we sent it to the journal, they had so many questions to us, like how is this different from biological age, and how is it different from frailty, and so we have a lot of discussion around this in the paper, I guess, in terms of separating it from frailty. For example, you could think of frailty as a bit like more like a threshold concept, and intrinsic capacity is something that you have a score and it goes down at small decrements. And so maybe you could think of intrinsic capacity as a measure that is more sensitive and picks up earlier. And what's attractive about this theory around intrinsic capacity, that it separates the context and the individual attributes. So note how these variables here, they don't include anything about to construct intrinsic capacity. We don't look at whether the person is married or how many children they have, or they live together with their children, or whether they live in a village or in a city. So it's a measure that is just around the individual and not about the individual's environment. And so, yeah, so in terms of frailty, I said it's more like a continuum where intrinsic capacity is more like a continuum, whereas frailty is like a cutoff. So we had some more discussion. So in terms of what we're doing, we're now doing a comparing more UK and China in terms of dependence in intrinsic capacity, and we want to do it more like a more of a age period cohort analysis, like not just in a cross section, but looking whether when we compute intrinsic capacity, whether it's similar over time and across countries. And Yafei, my PhD student, he has an interesting project on a life course decomposition, analyzing how intrinsic capacity is caused over the life course, how it builds up, how early life factors impact late life intrinsic capacity outcomes. And then we could also do this for many other of the studies included in the Gateway to Global Aging. And so, yeah, so, and then in the next step, we hope that this gets picked up and applied. So yeah, this was basically all I wanted to cover. This is my email address, but of course we should discuss this now. And thank you so much.